No easy way to transition after that, but we will. All guests are coming to you via the Fire Wings hotline. Try one of their delicious flavors of wings today. Fire Wings. Just wing it. Just wing it. We bring in our Raiders insider. We love talking to Scott Bair each and every week from NBC Sports Bay Area. Scott, how are you today?
Pretty good, guys. Just on to the I never see my wife and kids portion of the schedule. Minnesota up first on the docket.
Yeah, we've talked a lot. I didn't think about that, Scott. You're right. We've talked a lot about how the Raiders don't return home, I think, till November 3rd, and I hope you get some respite during the week. But my goodness, you're going to be a road warrior for a while, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a week in London in there,
true.
And I'm probably going to see a couple international English soccer games. So it's tough to say that I'm really put out. It's not like my 49ers brethren stuck in Youngstown, Ohio. I think I won that competition. But nonetheless, I definitely think that it's going to be another test for this group that maybe isn't quite as good as they looked against the Broncos, and definitely not as bad as they were in the second quarter against Kansas City.
Yeah, what happened there? Because, 10-0 start. There's probably some great optimism in Oakland at that moment. And then the second quarter happened, and obviously Patrick Mahomes is terrific. He had a brilliant second quarter. But looking back on that game, Scott, I look at, I think the second touchdown, if I remember right, for the Chiefs came with 5.5 minutes to go, and maybe 2 first downs, and that game is 14-10 at half. Instead, 3 and out, Chiefs score again, 3 and out, Chiefs score again. I mean, the Raiders gave them so many possessions in that quarter, and obviously they couldn't stop Mahomes. It just felt like offense. I know they couldn't stop Mahomes, but if the offense did anything in that quarter, I don't think that quarter gets away from him like it did.
Yeah, I think that is an underrated portion of it. That's also the stretch of time where Josh Jacobs was hooked up to an IV to avoid cramping, and he was pretty upset about that. He thought he did all the right things to be prepped for that game in the middle of the day, and wasn't. And I think Tyrell Williams was getting an injection for a hip pointer injury, and when you take out, let's say, the top 2 skill players for the Raiders offense, and now sans Antonio Brown, they really only have 3. That obviously hurts you, but you've got to find a way to move the chains, because defensively, that's part Mahomes, right? I think that's also part Andy Reid, right? That he identified plays with specific coverages and ways to take advantage of it. Of course, he has to have the talent, but I think that is just an offensive mastermind. I know there's a lot of people that think Sean McVay's the best or Sean Payton's the best. I think the guy wearing ketchup and mustard is my number one in terms of offensive play callers.
Scott, I know we'll bounce around here between the game and then the extra Raider stuff off the field. Any scuttlebutt, any thoughts at all as to whether or not the Raiders are going to dip their toes in the Jalen Ramsey, for lack of a better term, sweepstakes?
That's already happened.
Okay.
They are interested, for sure. And there's some talk, kind of, do they have the upfront cash to pay the type of contract that they'd have to pony up? And they don't have to give him a contract right away, right? I'm all for player empowerment and these guys being able to get off a team that they don't want. And I'm of the belief that when you play a physical game like this, you should be able to get every cent guaranteed, like your baseball and hockey, basketball brethren. But nonetheless, that's not the CBA that we're working under, right? Jalen Ramsey can't stop a trade. He can be upset, pissed off about it, but he can't stop a trade because he doesn't get a new contract, and there's new Vegas money coming, and there's time and salary cap space to give him the type of contract that he needs and ultimately deserves. What the cost will be, they're going to have to evaluate that internally. What their headache level will be, they're going to have to evaluate that internally. But John Gruden wants great players, right? And we were just talking about the Chiefs and that explosive second quarter. Well, that explosive second quarter is a lot harder with a guy like Jalen Ramsey in the pattern, somebody who matches up expertly with excellent receivers. And that's the type of player that you need against a rival who can win a world-class track meet, right? So I can understand their desire to go after them. and they don't have anybody to pay on the horizon. This isn't a 49ers situation, right? Where, 49ers, do they really want him? But they got to pay DeForest Buckner and George Kittle at some point, right? There's nobody on the horizon here who needs an immediate contract extension, and there is space. And I think that you can get creative and find ways to pay him. I think it's more a matter of is it cost prohibitive, especially, when you trade a first-round pick and you don't know what the slot is, that is so dangerous, right? Because what if the Bears suck, which is really possible considering who is under center? What if they're 5-11, and that's the number 11 pick, right? Is that worth it? That is tough math to come up with. This is, in my opinion, another exercise of Mayock discipline versus John Gruden's priorities and maybe desire to get great players, sometimes at extreme cost.
There's reports too that Jamal Adams may be upset with the Jets as well. Ramsey's probably the higher profile guy, but Adams is good. Who would be a better fit if the Raiders were to target either one?
I think when you have a 24-ish-year-old cornerback who can be the shutdown guy, I think that's the type of guy that you corral. Now, whether he's mentioned Las Vegas because of the state income tax, he's in a state right now in Florida that has no state income tax. I'm always leery of guys that are like, I want to go to Vegas, right? As opposed to I want to play for the Raiders, or, even if the state income tax thing is something new, do you want to be the leader of the nightlife there? Because you certainly can. You can probably make some extra money at, Caesar's Sunday night soirees. But nonetheless, that would be the direction that I would go, because I think that guy is truly proven. And look, I don't want to have, I'm not saying that I know the Raiders draft needs right now. There's a lot of injuries and off-season movements and all those types of things, right? But they have two extreme and glaring needs at premium positions, right? This defensive line is a multi-year rebuild. You got to get another edge rusher, period, right? And with Antonio Brown across the country now, you need another high-profile receiver, and you need him immediately. That's becoming apparent very quickly. So if you need those two guys, right, and you have 2 first-round picks, and of course, whatever best player available nonsense, but that's how I'd spend my 2 first-round picks and survive with Conley and Worley or whoever else you can find on the open market, considering you're going to have to pay Jalen Ramsey pretty soon anyway. That's my argument for standing pat. I could understand John Gruden's argument for going big right now.
Scott Bair, NBC Sports California with us. Scott, I'll let you in on the cesspool sometimes. That is our text line. But I get this response here. So from the 209, are you kidding me? After Antonio Brown, the Raiders would consider Jalen Ramsey. Mike Mayock's not that dumb. Well, A, is he? B, is it Mayock's call? And C, would it be dumb, in your opinion?
My response to what used to be the area code of my hometown, Visalia, California, the Central Valley Unite. I would answer it this way. One, Antonio Brown is, I think, either 31 or almost 31.
Yeah.
Jalen Ramsey is 24. Right. Entering his prime with an all-pro feather in his cap. And I think it's a different type of headache.
Agreed.
Right? And that Jalen Ramsey may only be good as a front runner in terms of wanting to win, and maybe super upset at not wanting to do that, and may want the players coach that John Gruden can be. But I don't think that he's the trouble in other senses in the way that Antonio Brown is. Cornerbacks are premium positions, and I think obviously they would have to do better and more extensive homework than what they did leading up to the Antonio Brown thing. Hopefully their lesson has been learned. So I think for those reasons, for the age, and for, look, you're going to need some, prescription strength Motrin probably at some point when you're dealing with that guy. But at the same time, if you want to surround yourself with great players, sometimes not everybody is Jerry Rice. Even Charles Woodson, the beloved Charles Woodson, one of my favorites I've ever covered. When he was young and brash, he wasn't exactly easy to deal with. Right. He thought, OTAs were, truly voluntary and not for him. There's a lot of examples of that. And when you look at, I don't know, this is an overrated term, but transcendent talent at a premium position, sometimes you got to make these types of jumps.
Scott, something you wrote about here, I think has shown up a little bit in the first couple of games. In one of the byproducts, obviously, of losing a talent like Antonio Brown, you're missing what you thought was going to be your number one offensive player, and you said, Derek Carr and the Raiders' offense is going to need more than Williams and Waller. How big of an issue is that going to be, finding some other people that can make plays in the passing game?
I think it's vital, and you can't just create another receiver in Madden and have him head on over to Alameda, unfortunately for the Raiders, because that's another issue with the Antonio Brown departure, was the timing of it, right? There was no chance of creating another top or even viable option, and now you're in the trade market, and everybody knows you got 2 first-round picks, and they gave away a second-rounder, let's not forget about that, in the Mac trade. So they don't have a ton to go get a premium outlet position. But now we're talking about the group of Ryan Grant, spent all summer on the roster bubble. Keelan Doss, still a work in progress, despite the fact that him sneezing can send my website into crash mode.
Yeah, where's Keelan Doss? That's your answer, Scott. Jeez.
I know, right? Come on.
Come on.
Work in progress,
right,
and all those types of things. But nonetheless, to your point, it is an issue, because the longer that you don't have secondary options, the more defenses see that on tape, and the more that they're willing to slant coverage, and then the harder life gets, and so on and so forth. I will say that the running backs against type for John Gruden offenses, the running backs have not been involved in the offense. In the passing game very much, and that includes Josh Jacobs and Washington and Richard. So I think that may be an option. Get those guys some options in the flat. But you're right, something's got to change. And Ryan Grant's he just has to do better from the outside. But again, he's being thrust into a position I don't think he ever expected to be in.
Well, and let's stick with Josh Jacobs here. Another very decent game for him. He had the 28-yard catch in week 1 against Denver, wasn't thrown to in week 2, and his workload went way down in that second half. How much of that was a product of the Raiders being down 28-10? How much of that was the cramping, the IV, and all that, and was there something else going on there in your opinion?
Yeah, John Gruden mentioned on Monday about a groin issue.
Yeah.
That's not something that I talked to Josh after the game. That's not something that came up then. Not saying he should have volunteered it, but that's not something that I was aware of at the time. And I know he was getting IV'd up. Now how his groin is doing, he was being further evaluated on Monday, and we'll know a bit more in a couple hours here. But he is the type of guy that I think part of it was negative game script. The other part of it, I think, is that the Raiders only had one pass of 25 yards or more, despite maybe having some shots dialed up. But nonetheless, I do think Josh Jacobs has to get more involved. He's now quickly becoming their most essential offensive weapon. Not saying that they're going to become, ground and pound or anything like that, but with Richie Incognito back and Gabe Jackson mending maybe faster than even the Raiders anticipated, that he's going to be the central cog here moving forward. Because if he's not, and I think he will be, if he's not getting the type of workload that we saw in week 1, I think this offense and this quarterback will suffer. And it's crazy to put all that on a rookie, but that's how we've shifted now with this new Antonio Brownless paradigm.
Scott, how about the running attack this week they're going to face in the Minnesota Vikings? Dalvin Cook's off to a great start. How equipped are the Raiders to slow him down this week?
A lot better than they were last year. They only allowed 33 yards rushing to the Chiefs, and they made a concerted effort to stop the run game, and at times, as they say, hindered their pass rush. I still point to a talent issue up there more than anything else, but their run defense is better. Run defense versus a dynamic. Fun matchups that you look for. So nonetheless, I think that's going to be an intriguing matchup. I think you guys I've said on this radio station my feelings towards Joe Flacco, right, and his past his prime incompetence. I think put Kirk Cousins, not in that exact classification, but in that same general vicinity, right? Wow. He's somewhere in the margin for error. I don't have a lot of faith or trust in what he's able to do, especially in the clutch, and I think that if you can stop the run and force him to do things, yeah, they have a good receiver core, and yeah, I could eat some crow next week, but if you want a fire take, there it is. I don't think Kirk Cousins is very good. If they can slow Dalvin Cook down, they can shut that crowd up and have what I think is a real chance to win on Sunday.
Derek Carr is such a focus on the season, and 10-0 against the Chiefs coming out of the first quarter. It's the first time the Chiefs have been shut out in a quarter in, 22 straight, something silly like that. And as we know, 4 touchdowns all in the second. They were shut out 3 out of 4 quarters. Do we look at that? Does Raider fan Scott look at 3 out of 4 quarters being shut out and go, oh, well, this defense has something? Or also, do we worry more about the fact that the offense was shut out, the Raiders' offense, against that Chiefs defense for the final 3 quarters?
Yeah, I would take a look at that as a considerable issue, considering that they had to score and there were opportunities to get themselves in the game. Or as you guys pointed out earlier, a couple of second quarter first downs and it slows the train. I also think, though, right, that, with some great basketball teams, I guess the Warriors have done it before, or even some football teams that they're like, okay, we can beat this team by putting our foot on the gas for 7 minutes, right? And then the Chiefs put their foot on the gas for 7 minutes, and they're like, we cool? Okay, great, thanks. Let's all hop on the bus, right? There was probably more in there if it was required as the game went along. But nonetheless, I know that's what the Raiders are pointing to, Raiders players and their leadership are pointing to, hey, we did X, Y, and Z against this team. I think the first quarter was pretty good, something to keep an eye on, and it's just kind of a trend that's developing in my brain after the first couple games in relation to how they played last year. John Gruden is an excellent game planner, and Paul Gunther, I think, came up with some interesting kind of novel schematics for how to deal with Kansas City in terms of playing 4 cornerbacks. Darryl Worley was kind of like a Travis Kelce shadowing safety-ish hybrid player, and those things worked for a while, but Andy Reid's counters worked even better. And the reason why I say all that is if you go back to even last year, right, they were gangbusters on opening and secondary drives. They scored all the time. The first 2 games here, they have looked fantastic, offensively especially. They might even be the league's best on the first 2 drives of each game over the first couple weeks, which says the game plan and script extremely well. What do you do after that? I think that is sort of the issue. You can game plan and kind of help yourself when you're on the wrong end of a talent disparity, but how are you going to counter? How are you going to continue to move through it to survive 4 quarters of competitive games in order to give Derek Carr the opportunities that he needs in the fourth quarter where he's got 17 fourth-quarter comebacks? That's a lot. But, yeah, I think it's about adjustments by the quarterback and by the coaches that kind of determine whether you're able to sustain hot starts as opposed to what happened against the Chiefs.
Well, Scott, we appreciate your insight as we always do. We'll talk to you again next week and enjoy the long road journey ahead over the next few weeks.
You know what? Minneapolis, not too bad. I'm sure I could find some Swedish chefs up there to make some good stuff.
Hey, I lived in St. Paul for 2 years. Go find a Juicy Lucy hamburger. Seriously, it's one of the best burgers. It's where they put the cheese inside the burger. It all started right there.
I mean, cheese wrapped in meat.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yep.
I'm in. So, I'll have a full report card for you guys next week. Thank you, sir.
Thanks,
Sounds
buddy.
good. There's Scott Bair joining us. Again, all guests coming to you via the Fire Wings hotline. Try one of their delicious flavors of wings today. Fire Wings, just wing it. That sounds good.